Serafina was not the kind of woman people forgot easily. She had warm brown eyes that always seemed to be thinking, a quiet voice that somehow carried across a room, and a way of standing that made others feel safe, as if everything was going to be all right as long as she was nearby. She had been chosen as Luna not because she was the loudest or the most powerful, but because the pack had seen something in her that even she had not yet fully understood. The Iron Crest pack was enormous. It stretched across 5 mountain territories, ruled by a man whose name alone was enough to silence a room. Alpha King Calum Drake was tall, broad-shouldered, and deeply serious. He did not smile often. He did not speak more than necessary. He had built his kingdom through years of hard decisions and harder battles, and those who served under him respected him the way people respect a storm, with both awe and a healthy amount of fear. Serafina and Calum had chosen each other. It had not been arranged or forced. Out of all the people in all 5 territories, they had found each other, and for a time, it had been good. But kingdoms are complicated, and good things do not always last. The trouble began quietly, the way most serious trouble does. Whispers started moving through the council chambers. Soft words slipped into conversations at the right moments. Someone was feeding lies to the right people. Serafina, they said, had been meeting secretly with the Borderless Wolves, a rogue group that had been threatening the eastern edges of Calum's land for years. Serafina, they said, could not be trusted. Serafina was dangerous. None of it was true, but the lies were told carefully, with details that sounded real, and they were told by people Calum trusted. On a cold night in late autumn, Calum called her before the council. She stood in the great hall in her Luna robes, her feet bare on the stone floor, and she looked at him across the long table. She expected him to ask her for her side of the story. She expected questions, a discussion, perhaps even an argument. He did not ask her anything. He read the charges aloud in a flat, controlled voice, and when he was done, he pressed his ring to the exile scroll without looking at her. Not once, not even at the end. The mark on her neck, the one that had connected her to the pack, to him, to everything, began to burn the moment the scroll was sealed. It was a pain unlike anything she had ever felt, not in her skin but deeper, somewhere that had no name. She fell to her knees on the cold stone, and not a single person in that room moved toward her. They took her to the eastern border before dawn. They gave her nothing, no shoes, no food, no message. They walked her to the edge of the Ashwood, a stretch of dead, gray forest that marked the boundary between the kingdom's territory and the lawless land beyond, and they left her there in the dark. She stood at that border for a long time after they left. The wind moved through the dead trees. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out and went quiet. Then she walked forward. The Ashwood was not empty. It was home to wolves that no pack had claimed. Exiles, outcasts, those who had been left behind for one reason or another. They were called the thornless, and the rest of the wolf world considered them worthless. They were not. They were simply people who had been thrown away, and thrown away people learn things that comfortable people never do. Serafina nearly died in the first week. She found food by memory and instinct. She slept in the hollow of a rotting oak on the 3rd night, because the temperature dropped too fast for her to make any other arrangement. On the 4th night, a large rogue wolf tried to drive her off his territory. She had no weapon, and no pack behind her. She grabbed a broken branch from the ground, and she fought back. The fight was ugly and exhausting, and she was trembling when it was over, but she was still standing. The Thornless found her on the 7th day. Their elder, a weathered she-wolf named Marin, stood over her in the gray morning light and looked at her for a long moment. "You're still alive," Marin said. "Yes," said Serafina. "Most aren't, at this point." Marin turned and walked back toward the camp. "Come then." Serafina followed. Over the weeks that came after, she learned that she was carrying a child. She told no one who the father was. She told no one she had ever been a Luna. She gave herself a simple story. Just another exile. Just another wolf who had been cast out. And she worked alongside the Thornless quietly, learning their ways, earning their trust, one small action at a time. The birth came in deep winter. Marin sat with her through it, practical and calm, saying very little. The baby was a boy. He had silver eyes, bright and sharp even in his first hours, and something about his small face made Serafina feel a grief she was not ready to name. She held him close, and let the feeling pass through her without letting it stop her. She named him Kalen. She told herself it meant nothing. Motherhood and survival have a way of changing a person, not by making them harder, exactly, but by making them clearer. Serafina knew who she was now, in a way she had not when she was Luna. She had no title to lean on, no palace to stand in, no rank to protect her. All she had was herself, and she discovered, slowly, that this was enough. She trained every morning, even when she was tired. She learned field medicine from a disgraced healer who had been living among the thornless for years. She learned to read maps and plan movement routes from a former beta who had lost his pack in a territory battle and never quite recovered. She learned to listen, really listen, to people who had every reason to distrust anyone who seemed too confident or too certain. By the time Kalen was taking his first steps, the thornless had started coming to Serafina when there was a problem to solve. Not because she told them to, because whenever she was involved, things got better. When a group of dangerous rogues began raiding their camps, Serafina mapped their pattern over 3 weeks and organized a response that stopped the raids completely. When 2 feuding groups within the thornless reached the edge of open conflict, she sat with each side separately, heard them out without judgment, and came back with terms that neither group had thought to offer. The conflict ended. People shook hands. Life went on. Marin watched all of this for a long time without saying anything. Then one evening, by the fire, she finally spoke. "You were born for this," she said quietly. "Whoever took it from you was afraid of what you would become." Serafina stared into the fire and did not answer, but she did not disagree. Word traveled, the way it always does in communities that have no walls. Exiled wolves from other regions began finding their way to the Ashwood. Rogues who had been living without any structure started settling near the thornless camp, drawn by the unusual thing happening there, not a pack built on fear and rank, but something more like a family built on shared survival and earned respect. They needed a name. The wolves began calling themselves the Grey Tide, and the name fit, quiet until it arrived, and then impossible to stop. By the 4th year, the Grey Tide had over 300 wolves. By the 5th, nearly 800. They had their own territory, organized supply lines, a training system, a small but effective medical unit, and a code of conduct that governed how disputes were handled, how resources were shared, and how new members were welcomed. It was not perfect, but it was real, and it worked, and the people in it were proud of it. None of this reached Alpha King Calum Drake as anything more than a vague rumor. Rogue groups rose from time to time. They always collapsed. He paid the reports no serious attention. He had other problems. The Eastern Borderless Wolves, the very group Serafina had been falsely accused of working with, had grown into a genuine and serious threat. They had taken down 2 of Calum's allied packs in the past year. His army was stretched thin from years of campaigns in the West. His council was divided. 2 political alliances he had arranged after the exile had produced nothing useful, and the people he had trusted most had shown themselves, one by one, to be less trustworthy than he had believed. He also could not sleep. He had not told anyone this. He would not have known how to explain it. The connection between him and Serafina had never been formally ended. Ending it would have required admitting it existed in a way his pride could not manage. And so it remained, a quiet, constant ache that sat behind his chest every day, every night, worse in the dark, worse in the silence. He told himself it would fade. 6 years later, it had not faded. Then an emissary arrived from a coalition in the East. Gray banner, professional manner, reasonable terms, a temporary military alliance against the borderless wolves, shared intelligence, no territorial claim. One condition: the Alpha King had to meet their commander in person before any agreement was signed. Calum agreed. He expected a rogue warlord, someone rough, self-taught, probably difficult to deal with. He rode to the border with his beta and a small guard. The Grey Army was already assembled when he arrived, and the sight of it stopped him mid-stride. They were enormous in number and organized in a way that made his own guard shift uncomfortably. Thousands of wolves, standing calm and ready, arranged in formations that showed real training, real discipline, real command. The commander walked out from the center line to meet him. She moved like someone who had long ago stopped wondering whether people would respect her, and had simply decided to be worth respecting. She wore practical gray leather and iron-fitted gloves, and she did not rush. He did not recognize her. And then she was 10 feet away, and the scent reached him, and every single thought in his mind went silent. The mate bond, which had been a dull ache for 6 years, lit up in his chest like something that had been waiting. He took a step backward without meaning to. His beta glanced at him sharply. Serafina stopped walking. She looked at him with calm, steady brown eyes and waited. She let him absorb the moment. She did not help him. Then a small hand appeared at her left side, tugging lightly at her jacket. A boy, 5 years old, silver-eyed, curious, peered out from behind her at the stranger. Calum looked at the child's eyes. He knew those eyes. They were Drake eyes, silver as winter light, unmistakable in every generation of his bloodline. His mouth opened and closed once, and something in his face that had been controlled for 6 years quietly fell apart. Serafina spoke first. "I am Commander Voss of the Grey Tide. I believe we have an alliance to discuss." The negotiations lasted 3 days. They were conducted with full formality, scribes present, every term recorded. Serafina was precise, prepared, and professional in a way that left no room for anything personal. She knew her numbers. She knew her people's capabilities. She knew exactly what she was offering, and exactly what she needed in return. Calum matched her. It was the only thing he could do. On the second night, he found himself outside her tent in the dark, unable to sleep, as usual. She was sitting outside, watching her son sleep through the open flap. She heard him come, and did not turn. He asked if they could speak without the titles for a moment. She was quiet for a long time. Then she moved slightly on the log where she was sitting and made space beside her. What happened in the hours that followed was not a reunion in the way people might hope for in stories. It was something more necessary and more honest than that. Serafina spoke quietly about what the exile had cost her, not in anger, because the anger had burned away long ago, but as a simple record of events and consequences. She told him what the first year had been like. She told him about the birth, alone in winter. She told him about Marin and the Thornless, and what it had taken to build what she had built. She told him she did not want to come back. She had a people. She had a life. It belonged to her, in a way that her time as Luna never quite had, and she was not willing to give it up for anyone. She told him there was one thing she required from him, outside of the military agreement. He needed to formally acknowledge Kalen, publicly, legally, before his council, as his son and heir, not for her, for the boy, who deserved his history without shame attached to it. Calum agreed immediately. It was one of the only times in 3 days that he spoke before thinking. He would sort out the rest of the political and legal details later. On that point, there was nothing to consider. He also, quietly and without fanfare, reopened the investigation into the treason charges. His new intelligence chief traced the original accusations back to the former beta who had whispered poison into the right ears at exactly the right time. The evidence was clear. The former beta was removed from his position and exiled. Calum said nothing publicly about why. The people who needed to understand understood. The Grey Tide and the Iron Crest Pack fought together against the borderless wolves in a campaign that lasted 4 months. Under Serafina's tactical planning, coordinated with Calum's knowledge of the territory, the borderless faction was broken apart. Their wolves were not destroyed. They were offered a choice, the same choice the Thornless had once offered Serafina: join a structured community, or keep wandering alone. Most chose to come in. After the campaign ended, Serafina negotiated formal recognized status for the Grey Tide. It took time and several difficult council sessions, but the result was real. The Ashwood Compact, as it came to be officially known, was recognized as an independent pack under the broader interpack law. It had territory, rights, and standing. The wolves who had once been called worthless were now documented, recognized members of a world that had previously pretended they did not exist. Serafina and Calum did not rebuild their relationship the way it had been before. Perhaps that version of things was no longer possible. Perhaps neither of them wanted it. What they built instead was something more complicated and more durable. a shared commitment to their son, a working alliance between their peoples, and a mutual respect that had been forged in very different fires and had come out stronger for it. Kalen grew up knowing exactly who he was. He spent time in the Ashwood Compact, learning from his mother's people. He spent time in Iron Crest, learning what a large, established kingdom looked like from the inside. He was curious about everything, and afraid of very little. And everyone who met him agreed, privately, that he was going to be remarkable. Years later, when people in the Northern Territories spoke about the Grey Tide and how it had changed the shape of the wolf world, they always started with Seraphina. They talked about the exile. They talked about the long years in the Ashwood. They talked about the morning she walked out to meet a king with 800 wolves behind her, and a child at her side, and the way she had looked at him, steady, unimpressed, completely at peace with everything she had become. She had not come back to take anything from him. She had come back because she was strong enough to, and because her people needed the alliance, and because her son deserved a father who had to face what he had done. That, more than any battle or negotiation or formal agreement, was what people remembered. She had not needed to be rescued. She had not needed to be forgiven. She had simply needed time, and ground under her feet, and the freedom to become, without anyone's permission, exactly who she had always been.